Kick off proceedings. Can I first of all offer a big Unite welcome to everybody here this evening, to members, to Unite members, to Irish Labour History Society members, and to comrades. You're more than welcome. We're launching Rayner's book. The title, of course, took Rayner to come up with From the GPO to the Winter Palace. Unite is very happy to support contributions to our own political thought, our own political ideas, and I'd like the Union to be associated with more and more of that with comrades on the left. And I think the movement should be more associated with contributions like that. So Unite looks forward to supporting issues like this. Like all good historical work, Rayner's contribution here is certainly provocative, not prescriptive. And Rayner provides guidance, the events, the class relationships, the historical context, the strategies of real-time participants. He provokes alternative understandings and insights, and therefore a constructive discussion. And today, of course, we face similar tasks in terms of building alliances. It's not, as I say, about 101 meetings, it's not about who's the most left or who gets the Oscar for being the most left. It's about building alliances amongst ourselves on the left and within the movement. And I don't think there's anything like what we've had recently under Right to Water and Right to Change, and comrades coming together and giving the leadership that was needed on that issue of water charges, and then building on the success and the massive demonstrations that we had on Right to Water and what's transferred into the policies within Right to Change. And we had a meeting earlier of the Right to Water, and in fact the 17th of September is now designated as the next massive demonstration that we want to build. We're not going to be led for the next phase of this. We have the suspension of water charges. We're not going to be led in the next phase of this by somebody who was the architect of partnership and was part of getting the trade union movement a bad name. He's not going to lead us through what we need to do in the next phase of the anti-water charges. First of all, what Rayner has done is provided us with something that's first of all a pleasure to read. It's highly condensed, it merits a rereading, a mulling over. I'd urge all readers to engage with this, have an argument with Rayner, shake or nod your head, but test your own ideas against what Rayner is saying. It's a work that provokes and indeed invites engagement, disagreement and debate. You can't say that about many works, but you can about this. So I'm delighted to introduce tonight's proceedings. I'm delighted that Unite is associated with the launch of Rayner's book, and I'll hand over now to the esteemed Jack McGinley from the Irish Labour History Society.
I'm not going to second guess what Jimmy said on it, other than I've read it 5 times because I was proofing it as well as Francis Devine. That's one of the original copies of what it would have looked like when it came. There's all the different scribblings on it. It's a fairly decent piece of work, and it's a lot more polished now than it was. And in fairness to Rayner, its iteration goes back 9 years to the first time he spoke on this topic. And he again returned to it in a volume of Sayre, and he then spoke on it last May in East Wall in conjunction with the Dockworks Museum project. And I made a commitment to him last autumn that we would publish this year, and I'm glad to honour that now tonight. There are 2 distinct things in it. There's obviously the revolution in 1916, there's the revolution in 1917, and there's the contrast between the 2. And it's a pamphlet well worth dipping into. It's full of scholarly material, much of which many people in this room won't have read before. Some people will. And for that reason I commend it, and I'm very, very happy that the Society is associated with its publication. So without further ado, I'm not going to keep you anymore. I'm going to ask Joan Collins to officially launch Rayner's magnum opus.
to be here tonight in officially launching Rayner's book, and thank you very much for the invitation, Rayner. I believe we have another similar history in that the two of us were expelled from the Labour Party at different times in our lives. But that's just a part of history. And I think it is important, as we said here, that history is debated, not with rancour or with I know everything, or this is the line and this is what is the line of the party at the time or the group at the time. I think it's really important that we get debate, and really good debate within the movement, and to realign, because at the moment the establishment is realigned, and they've realigned after the big success of the huge anti-water charges campaign, where thousands came out the streets. The establishment did not know how to respond to it. They've realigned themselves now, particularly now with in relation to the Dáil, the way it's composed. You have Fianna Fáil, who are the opposition and government at the same time, and they're trying to successfully work that through. You have a government who is on tender hooks, because they're trying to play the game as well. And it was part of one of my first speeches in the Dáil where I made the point about Garibaldi at that period, where you had the landed gentry, and they said we were going to have a meeting with Garibaldi, and he said, now listen lads, for everything to stay the same, everything must change. Okay, and I think that's a lesson that we really have to learn. They want things to change, so things will stay the same, and they will play their game up in that little ball in Leicester House. And I think books like this actually are really, really welcome to try and look at our history and the way it is played over the last 100 years. Two events, 1916 and the Russian Revolution, very different outcomes, had a huge impact on the 20th century. The Russian Revolution obviously was a world historic event, and 1916, although a failure in some people's eyes, it was a key impetus for the magnificent movements by the colonial peoples for change after the Second World War. It was one of the greatest revolutionary movements in world history. You look at India and all those countries who looked at what we did in this country, and then used that as a template for their changes in their society. The book is really well researched and very factual, and I commend Rayner on that. Although the author clearly has an ideological standpoint, and it's very clear that you have Rayner, and I think that is an important thing to have. You can't go into these things when you're sort of saying that it's unbiased histories, and I think if we say that if we're unbiased, I think that's wrong, because we do have a standpoint, we do have our positions, and they're there to be argued in not a rancorous way, but in a very, very camaraderie way, and I think that's important. I think this book sets out to deal with the similarities and the difference between Tsarist Russian and Ireland under British rule, and the reason why the revolution succeeded in Russia but not in Ireland. There are plenty, to my mind, of so-called Marxists who tell you it's very simple, they had Lenin and the Bolsheviks and we didn't. But sorry, it's a bit of a bugbear with me. People speaking in the name of scientific socialism who cannot be bothered with even the most limited study or research, never mind scientific analysis. And so this little book is not an easy read, it's not, but it's well worth reading. In the last few months I've had the privilege of discussing with a group of young people in Cherry Orchard in Ballyfermot, and they're great. They're 16 to 18 year olds, determined to keep away from drugs, determined to keep away from the gangs in their community, determined not to get involved in criminality, but politically they're extremely raw and inexperienced. I wouldn't recommend this book to them at this point, but I certainly would recommend it to them in a year's time for them to read the book after a certain amount of experience they've gone through themselves. I think the Right to Water campaign has been mentioned. It's a huge movement, and has garnered a whole layer of new people into activity, and not into traditional activity that we'd expect heretofore. It's a completely different type of activity people are involved in. I think it's a new generation of youth and working class activists beginning to emerge. It's step by step in some cases, but it's the very beginning. And when they start to ask about socialism and about the history of our class, I hope they won't get glib answers, some political line they can learn off, but good assistance and advice, which is to read widely, to study, and above all, to think for yourselves. I think it's really important to have independent thinking in relation to our class history. And I think Rayner has played a significant role with this booklet in relation to this. Finally, this is a good introduction, but if anyone wants to go further, could I recommend Leon Trotsky's History of the Russian Revolution, and I'm sure he would, and everything by James Connolly, and I was delighted to see that Rayner has introduced some pieces of James Connolly's history there as well, with introductions and that. I think that's the sort of stuff that we can certainly give to young people who are coming for the first time into the history. And I'd like to thank Unite and the Irish History Society. It's brilliant that these events are organised, and it's brilliant to be here as part of this Rayner. Thank you very much.
I'd now like to call on Granny Hughes to address us.
You know, great similarities in what happened in the Russian Revolution, where the Bolsheviks got involved politically in every sphere, where in Ireland today that's what's happening. The unions, the progressive trade unions, I would say, because I mean there's a lot of the unions aren't, they're only paying piecemeal to what's happening in Ireland today. But if you look at the 16 was about militarism really for a lot of people. There wasn't. Connolly and would have been very involved, obviously, as everybody knows, in socialism and involving the trade union and the people in a progressive socialist Ireland. But I think the water movement today in relation to the Soviet Revolution is that people today are, the ordinary working class, the ordinary people are starting to mobilise. Not just, they're doing it themselves in their communities and had been prior to the water charge movement starting up. But I think that while Rayner and people like Rayner are talking about history, I would just like to say that we need our academics working with us, writing, not just writing about the past, but being active with us in what's happening in the country today. And I would also say that it's important and I know people may not like this, the people that are here, but we have many people, hundreds and hundreds of people that are involved in this, in the movement today, like there must have been during the Bolshevik Revolution, who are not as educated as maybe they should be academically, that won't be able to assimilate the writings of Rayner. And what I would say is that if in the short term that we are to politicise our communities, that the writings of Rayner, right, and other people must take that into account.
Rayner Lysaght has published many pamphlets over his lifetime. He's particularly renowned for many editions of his pamphlet on the Limerick Soviet. He has always been on the left and has been for very many years a stalwart of the Irish Labour History Society. So I call on Rayner now to speak to his pamphlet and his thoughts.
Thank you, Jack, and thanks you also for your work in improving the pamphlet. As indeed, I would thank Francis Devine for his services. I'm sorry that he's not here today, but there you are. Also the others, people like Kay and Robert Egan, who at the moment when the whole thing had gone down the drain, duly took it back and typed out a new disc with results that the thing was back on track. And of course, thanks to Jimmy for who got to unite to grubstake the whole...
Squeeze the money out of me, Rayner.
But anyway, first I'd like to take up Bernie, because what she says is absolutely correct. I suppose, it could be accused of pedagogy. I will merely say that many years ago, in the late 60s, the 70s, the 80s, I was perhaps more active than I am today. And I sort of put my shoulder to the wheel, my nose to the grindstone, and it's damn difficult to combine the two, I can tell you. And I duly worked hard, and all the time I was struck by the fact that, yes, agitation is great, you march up and down, but in the end, people just didn't know what the next step would be, or why they were doing it, or how, particularly how they had failed, why they were doing much the same things that they had done before without understanding it. I hope to goodness I was wrong and that the level of consciousness was higher than I thought. But friends, I was unfortunately correct. So that is why you see me as the old pedagogue sort of leaning on the rostrum and telling you about it. It's also true today, and I would bring this to your attention, that the learning of history is in danger. This was notable particularly in the last Doyle, when you have a last government, when you have a minister proposing the downgrading of history. History itself, of course, cannot be downgraded. Well, we all live history, I mean, it's what we breathe. But learning about it is another thing, and reducing people's knowledge of history is an extremely dangerous and thing to do. You can do it in many ways, simply falsifying facts and doing it, but just encouraging people to ignore it is dangerous. Two quotations come to mind. One was by this guy Cicero, who was a Roman, and he said, if we do not learn our history, we are like little children. A much later guy, who was an American, George Santayana, said that what is better known, those who do not know their history are fated to repeat it. Both these statements were correct, although in my opinion neither Cicero or Santayana were much good as historians when they wrote it, but that's another story. Personally, I like, the thing that comes to my mind more is that work which since the eponymous year has been rather neglected, that is in George Orwell's 1984. And at the end of 1984, the top bureaucrat, whose name by the way is O'Brien, I don't know what the significance of that was, but he is facing the hero and he says, look, nothing has happened before, nothing will happen again. All we have are you and me sitting in the room together, and outside there is the boot stamping on the face, and that will continue to stamp on the face forever. And that is what is meant when you get too dismissive of history. That is the logic of it. I don't believe for a moment that the people who are trying to downgrade the teaching of history understand that. I think they're just muddled thinkers, but it's out of muddled thinking, and as we have seen the last few weeks, that a lot of big disasters can come. And to move on more particularly to the form of labour history that I tend to specialise in. Labour history, much denounced, much dismissed. Generally, there's a big tendency to regard this as a mistake, as it shouldn't be. There shouldn't be labour history. I mean, it's practically unique. I mean, no one denies that there is military history, and I'm happy to say no one denies either that, you know, in fact, the relative new, the women's history, or herstory as it's often called. But labour history, as soon as you say a lot of there is a tendency to fear it and avoid it. A few years ago, I think it was right at the end of the last century, a very distinguished academic from Trinity came down to the Labour History Society and told us all solemnly that really there was not much point in having a labour history. What we should be doing is studying the history of work. In other words, not the struggles of people, workers, but the way people worked, and you know, sort of that presumably meant that you not only studied the tramway workers, you also studied how William Martin Murphy worked, and you get the idea. And of course, the idea there, and again, I'm not saying that he understood it. That would be tending to rather wipe out the whole idea of the workers' struggles. And I'm glad to say that this idea has rather disappeared since then. Now, to hone in a bit on the pamphlet itself, which is what we're here for. It took me longer than 9 years. I had the idea way back in the 60s that it would be a good subject. Why did I do it? Well, the man once said why he was going to climb Everest, and he did climb Everest and fell off it and died, but that's another point. He was asked, why do you climb Everest? He said, because it is there. And I wrote about these two revolutions because they were there, because there was an obvious common link immediately in the fact that they were both revolutions against the First World War. And, you know, nobody else had done it. And whether I've done the equivalent of your man, the mountaineer, falling off Everest, I don't know. You'll have to tell me later on. But I made this, worked this out, and I found that the only comparative study of these revolutions was in a rather jolly little children's book called the Book of Revolutions. I think it was published needless to say, in the 60s, of course. And I got a few copies and used to give them to nephews and nieces and friends' children until the book was duly went out of print later on in the 70s. But basically it talked about revolutions, but basically it talked about the two revolutions, the Irish Revolution and the Russian Revolution, and they were very different things as far as this book was concerned. The Irish Revolution for these people was basically that here was a group of people, a group of poets who went off and saw W.B. Yeats, Kathleen Hurahan, and then were inspired to occupy the GPO. And that was it. And then about a year later, there were all these glum-looking Bolsheviks sort of taking over. Not one of them had even written a dirty limerick, and I suspect Stalin would have written the dirty limerick, but it's not his directed work, so that's another story. Anyway, and they took over and produced the Soviet Union in its present form immediately. And at the time, I felt this was an oversimplification. Now, I went, so I began to look into it, and events supervened, and I had other things to write and other things to do, and anyway, the double half centenary went away, so I put it on the long finger, and came back, of course, in '07, as Jack has said, began the serious business. But I discovered anyway that there were very common features to both revolutions, far more than people had imagined. So I duly decided, came back and wrote this pamphlet. Now I will hone in on three more points that we've been told tonight that we shouldn't be too sectarian, and I suppose sort of, what is it, Gates said something about mixture hardens the heart or something. Anyway, I think I will probably be fairly sectarian now, but anyway, what the hell. Anyway, first of all, there's the question, I will bring your attention to the question of the Easter Rising. All these points are, by the way, about Ireland rather than about Russia. But the Easter Rising, for example, the present commemoration, the centennial, has been noted, deplored by a lot of group of very serious-minded and prestigious people, including, I think, at least 4 professors of history. Well, 2 of them, I think, are emeritus, but they were still professing and lecturing and generally spoofing. And, and also, of course, by that great thinker, Johnny Bruton, and then you have a few other people, Mackie Rowder. Their big complaint is, well, it was immoral and it was undemocratic. Well, first of all, I don't claim to be an expert on morality. But I will say that I know that at the time, the morality or otherwise of it was contested. It wasn't just a slam dunk, it wasn't just a decisive matter. It was the sort of people, clergy, disagreed with each other on this matter. And you know, within the rules of Catholic theology, and was it Tom Aquinas's basic rules for just war and all the rest of it. So you know, I think I have some sort of backing for denying the immorality of it, and not least, of course, when you talk about the deaths, the very bad deaths in the Easter Rising. We should remember that, in fact, it would seem that most of them were killed from by the British shots, either by high explosive or by deliberate, in some cases, deliberate murder by the British troops. But most of all in this morality thing, I notice the people who go spoof about morality, none of them seem to notice that John Redmond lied in his teeth when he was told to get people into the British Army. He said that Ireland had its independence. Ireland did not have its independence. Ireland had the promise of a possible Home Rule Assembly after a general election, a Home Rule Assembly which would be a provincial assembly after the general election. That is what Ireland had. And Redmond repeated his lies several times, all over the place in fact, and got more young Irishmen killed than were killed in all the Republican risings since and including 1798. But of course we don't hear this from these people. The other point that they make is, that they don't make, is of course to read most of their accounts. No one would think that there was some sort of armed struggle, I suppose you'd call it, going on somewhere outside Ireland, that you know, people were getting beaten up on the Somme and sort of Gallipoli. You know, this is totally irrelevant to these bloody people. You know, it's ridiculous. The only person who tried to contact it is Johnny Bruton, and his idea of the First World War is sort of glorified Western or of the style that went out of practice in Hollywood before the talking movies were invented. You know, they're all good guys in white hat, bad guys in black hats and pickle hounds. You know, that's Bruton's idea of the First World War. So I don't really take respect for this morality thing. But democracy is another thing again. It's a rising against democracy. Okay. So where was the democracy in 1916? Well, it was in Australia, it was in New Zealand, it was in several states of the United States, but it wasn't in Britain. It wasn't in the United Kingdom. All the countries I have mentioned as democracies at least had adult suffrage for all people over 21, male and female. This did not exist in Britain. A form of male adult suffrage existed in France. It also existed, surprise, surprise, in those awful undemocratic countries, Austria, not Hungary, but Austria and Germany. But it didn't exist in Britain. Britain, in fact, had what was called male household suffrage. In other words, the vote was restricted to the heads of households. On the other hand, of course, these nasty, undemocratic people, who I believe were mentioned in a recent book as fascistic, these people who went to the GPO, they called for a fully democratic franchise. It's in the proclamation. So I don't understand how it's undemocratic. Secondly, and the other point is, of course, that of the people who rose, and more research is needed, I hasten to add, but I think that on the evidence we have, most of them were people who were disenfranchised. Most of them were people, all the women of course, and many of the men who'd been living at home with their dads and who would have voted, you know, they were disenfranchised. So you have a vote, so you say it's undemocratic, you said the rising was for democratic aims, and it was fought by guys who had no votes and wanted to get democracy. And that's, I don't know, that seems to be I don't understand it, of course, it'll have to be explained to me, but it just seems to me in my simple way that that is a democratic rising, whatever else it is. Now, second point, Connolly. Friends, when I read books before Greaves, Desmond Greaves, on James Connolly, I have the feeling, particularly when I read them about his last months, the months of the war, I have the feeling that I would have, if I went to a lecture on astronomy, and the lecturer solemnly told me how the sun goes round the earth, the Ptolemaic universe, as it's called. Because they are completely sort of single-tracked. Connolly was going out to fight a revolution for Ireland, and that was it. So that you get in Bryan, you get in Fox, you get Davis, sure, that's it. Greaves's achievement was to bring some extra information into the matter which had the power to change it. His weakness was that he presented it badly. I'm not going to go into why, so that it's often overlooked, but nonetheless he brings in the Stuttgart resolution of 1907, which directed the members of the Socialist International to use these contradictions of the war to prepare for the socialist revolution, and he mentions the very important Dublin Steam Packet Company strike, which accompanied preparations for the rising up until the middle of April 1916. He doesn't draw the conclusions from them, and in fact successive biographers of James Connolly have rather tried to cover up these facts or avoid them and say that Connolly was simply organising a strike and, it had no connection. So it was left to me to produce the Newtonian account of Connolly's last months, and that is what is in this pamphlet. And I suggest you read it and disagree or agree, whatever you like. This is the fact that Connolly was combining the revolutionary potentials of republicanism and of syndicalism, and was trying to win on both fronts, and he failed, but very closely. The third point now, and I would draw attention to, is that after the after effects, I think most of you know that Labour pulled out of the national struggle after Connolly's death. But what is sort of smeared over is the role of Sinn Féin, and the new Sinn Féin after 1917, a determination to limit the bounds of the revolution. And to that extent, one of the great suppressions has been that of the Sinn Féin Convention, or Ardèche, of 1917, the regroupment convention. And a lot of emphasis on this has been that it was united behind the Republic, and even Griffith agreed with the Republic. And then, there's gossip that Constance Markievicz and the Gwyn objected to Owen MacNeill being elected to the committee, and then, but nonetheless, he was elected. Not that be though, but the social provisions of the convention, the resolutions that are passed at the convention are significant, because they are precisely the programme that was actually executed by Sinn Féin after it had established the first republic in 1919. And it is a bourgeois programme, it's a good capitalist programme, but there's hardly a shred of socialism, but certainly it is a retreat from the aspirations of the proclamation. And it is far more significant, I would say, than the Democratic Declaration of the Dáil, which was cobbled together so that Labour would support the Republic. Now, I'll just say two last remarks. Firstly, if you're not in the Labour History Society, join it, and if possible, write something on Labour history. It's quite probable that it'll be lousy, but please, there are people around who will do duly sort of advise you, and it will be done in a fairly friendly fashion, and I assure you it will. And the second thing is, traditionally these launches, you don't have time for public sort of questions. I don't think you'll have now. If you want it, apart from anything else, none of you sort of will have read enough sort of the pamphlet to make challenging questions. But you will have your opportunity on the 22nd of October next, when I shall be speaking again on this subject, and you'll be able to ask all the questions and challenge me all you like about it. I mean, most of you will hopefully have bought the pamphlet, some of you will even have read it, so it will be okay. All I ask is, don't throw any crusty rolls, they cause nasty scars. Thank you.
Well, the one thing you can always say about Rayner is what you see is what you get. I just want to finish this part of the evening by again thanking Unite and the Unite people that are here for helping us to bring this to fruition this evening. I do know that Unite, you have this historical thing on the 25th of July.
That's right, on the 1916 workers' year,
Yeah. And Rayner has just said the autumn seminar of the Irish Labour History Society will be on Saturday the 22nd of October down in Beggar's Bush as well. Without being pithy about his last remark, the reality is there are far more people writing on labour history subjects now than have ever done, and that's a good thing. And there are a lot more essays being written in secondary schools and third level that are reaching an awful lot better heights. I think there's a far greater appreciation, and it's not Dublin or Belfast centric. There are some very, very good stuff being written in Galway and Limerick and Waterford and Cork and the Midlands. Even there was an event recently in the Inishowen Peninsula, which is the second or third iteration of John Doherty. So there have been events in, obviously there were events associated with 1916 in Wexford, and there are tangents to that all over the place. And I suppose the other thing is, one of the good things about community history now is there's hardly a parish in Ireland where there isn't somebody leading some work. And I know a colleague of mine, Peter Connell, who's in Trinity College, who took retirement, is very close to finishing some fabulous research on urban centres and the way they brought local authorities and that brought water and other facilities, and he studied it in depth, particularly in Leinster but in other parts of Ireland. So all of these are welcome new material. And I should say as well that the Irish Society of Labour History, or Labour History Society, welcomes people who want to submit essays to the journal. As president, I don't have any say in what appears in the journal. Editors have total editorial freedom, and they determine what goes in it, and that's as it should be. But I'd just like to thank you all for your engagement here this evening. I repeat the thing, there's no good in coming along here tonight if you don't bring a copy of the booklet home with you. And more importantly, disseminate the information to colleagues about the availability of the booklet. It will be in Connolly Books in Temple Bar and a few books upstairs and a few other places around. And Eddie Penrose, who's the treasurer and the premises manager in the Labour History Society, we'll have it up on the website within a day or two, and you'll be able to buy it online if you want to buy it through PayPal or any other way. So without further ado, I'll thank you all for your attendance here this evening and enjoy the rest of the night.